Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. Today I have something really fun to share with you, and it's also inspired by May the 4th be with you today, and it's also my first ever tutorial video. So this is what I'll be creating during the video, which is a little baby Yoda or the child, whichever you prefer, honestly. And this is a special painting because right now I know a lot of us are stuck at home, so I wanted to do a tutorial with something that we have normally around the house. So that is Crayola markers. I think most people do have these, or you have them left over from your childhood. Either way, this was a $2 pack. But yeah, so this is the little painting, and it mainly just uses Crayola markers and water. So yeah, if you're wanting to do this tutorial along with me, I do have the link posted below to this little picture of the child from The Mandalorian, or you can choose any picture of the baby Yoda that you would like to do. And then also I have a link to these Crayola markers. I'm sure you can order them online and have them shipped to you. But yeah, so let's get started. Alright, so first steps real quick with the video paused. This is a long video, but I hope you enjoy and are able to follow along. If you have any questions, then definitely please leave a comment below so I can help out. But first of all, I used watercolor paper to draw my light sketch of Baby Yoda on. If you don't have watercolor paper, that is okay, but it will warp a lot and may not hold color as well. Watercolor paper is inexpensive and can be ordered online though, so there are some links in the description below where you can purchase some. So after sketching Baby Yoda, which by the way I drew this one twice so mess ups are totally okay, I taped it down with the border size I wanted, which is 1/2 inch. I taped it to my drawing board, which is great because it doesn't absorb water. I imagine you could also tape it down to a table if you wanted to, or another piece of wood. If you want a cheap drawing board though, then there are some links below. Also, I'm using 3 different paintbrushes here, which I have linked below as well. You mainly want to have a flat, small paintbrush, a round, very skinny, detailed paintbrush, and then a medium round paintbrush. Anything will do, but honestly these are the ones I use in pretty much every watercolor painting that I make. Now, getting started, I'm using a scrap piece of watercolor paper to draw on with my markers. It's important to do this because your paper will end up kind of pilling a little bit and flaking some as we go, so you don't want to apply the marker directly to the paper. So starting out with my green, yellow, pink, and blue markers, I'm going to apply the first layer of watercolor. I'm using a larger flat brush to do this because it lays down more color quickly. I mix up the green and yellow together to get the right green that I want, which you can always use realistic colors if you want, similar to what I'm doing, or you can keep them fun and poppy like the original marker colors. That's totally up to you. Also, just to know, it's important to keep these layers lightly colored, so use plenty of water. You can also see that I applied my first green, blue, and yellow colors down and went back in while it was still wet to apply some yellow. And I'm also going to do the same thing with the pink. Applying color on top of color while still wet allows the colors to blend better, which is a great way to approach the base layer. Now you can notice that I am pretty much only focusing on Baby Yoda at this point. I'm not mixing in my browns, which are on his clothes, just yet because I don't want them to bleed into the green area. Now I'm going to let it dry before I move on to the other colors in our base layer. To dry it faster, I recommend using a hairdryer at about 1 to 2 feet away from the painting. Also, sometimes the water will run away from the hairdryer while you're using it, so you can use a dry paper towel or a tissue to catch it. Moving on to his little clothes, I'm using brown, yellow, and a little bit of pink for the first layer. Again, keeping the color very light by mixing plenty of water with the colors. I'm also going to go back in a second with some gray, which I really just did because I didn't quite like the brown color I mixed up. So it's okay if you don't like one of the colors you put down, definitely go ahead and mix another color up, and while it's wet, change the color that it is. And again, drying it with my hairdryer, you can see that I also use a clean brush sometimes to soak up the really wet spots. Alright, so now that it's completely dry, I'm going to move in to add some more depth with the second layer. Again, this is extremely light, and the key point to kind of how I watercolor is to build up as many layers as you can, and this really helps give it a nice transparency and depth on the later layers. For this part, I'm mixing brown, gray, and some pink together for his eyes and mouth. For his ears, I'm keeping them very, very pink so that he's still like the cute little adorable guy that we love. I do add a tad bit of purple and gray to start building up some depth within his ears. And just one thing to note here, and I think this is key if you're watercoloring, even if it's like with real watercolors, I'm only adding colors that are not touching. So the eyes, lips, ears are all separated by dry areas, which you can see. This is key for not letting colors bleed into one another. I'm now going to go back in while my other areas are drying and add just a little bit more depth to the clothes with gray and brown. And this is pretty much right where I'm seeing some shadows start to happen in his picture. It's still super important, as always, to keep this very light so that we can get some nice transparent layers and fix anything in the future if we end up messing up. Alright, so next steps are pretty much just building up color and depth. I'm going to start going in. This is with more color and less water to really build up the depth and the shadows and start helping it pop a little bit more. Again, I wouldn't say this is super saturated, it's still a little bit watered down. And I'm going to take the green and yellow combination around his areas that are a little bit darker, and leaving lots of his face still dry because I want those to be his highlights. This is a good thing to think about. Your shadows are going to be your built up layers, while your highlights are going to be only 1 or 2 layers of paint. Again, drying real quick because I don't want my colors to bleed. If you notice them running, definitely take a second to dry them out so your painting is more crisp. So going in now with a much darker color, I'm using black and brown to start getting some better depth to the real darks on his face and clothing, starting with his eyes and mouth. I like doing this at this point because he's been honestly looking like a little blob, a cute blob, but still a blob. Now he's starting to look a little bit more like his adorable little self. So while that area is drying, I'm going to go ahead and go in with some much darker greens, which is pretty much just the black and the green markers mixed together. These are just going in the dark areas of his face. This is important because we want to start building up some contrast in our painting. And now I'm going to start going into the darks of his clothing, right where I see the blacks in the picture. I'm going to do 2 layers of this darker green right now before I let it dry so that they can kind of blend together. And I think it's important to note, you've been noticing that I work on his face and then his clothing next. And I think it's just the rhythm that I'm used to doing, but you can work any way you want to. You can finish the face first and then work on the clothing, whichever way makes you most comfortable. The main key is that you're letting the clothing dry a little bit before you go working on the face again, so that they don't bleed together. So now I'm going to go in with my tiniest paintbrush and get some stippling on his clothes. Again, just using brown and yellow and some gray to get this color. And I kind of go in the different areas to really add a little bit more detail to his face as well. And you can kind of see I'm putting in some pinks to keep him, I think pink just really makes him look really cute. So the steps beyond this, we really just take time to build more and more depth to our painting by building up the darks. So sometimes watercolorists do this all at once. I really build up layers because I like when my painting is dry and I'm adding wet paint to it. It makes it a lot more crisp. So it's really up to you what you would like to do. But now I'm going basically back in with a black marker to go around the edges of his eyes and anywhere else that I really see the dark blacks. And again, there's very little water added to this at this point. And I will note that our detail brush is definitely our best friend while we're doing this, but I will say if you don't have a tiny brush, I used to use toothpicks when I was younger, but it definitely takes a lot longer. And we're pretty much on like layer 20 at this point. But this is honestly how I really build up depth in my watercolors, and I think it takes it from being like a novice watercolor painting to something better. And again, just using darker colors to keep building up the contrast. Alright, so our next step, which is one of my favorites, is making the background. It is absolutely essential that your painting is completely dry before this. So to do this, I take my wide paintbrush and I'm using yellow, green, and brown, but mainly yellow because he deserves to be in a bright, sunny place every day of his amazing life. You can see I'm dabbing the color in different places, and this placement is pretty much all up to you and what you would like. All of this is very, very wet, so it'll bleed together nicely. And I pretty much just continue adding colors until I like the way it looks. And now I'm taking this moment to really take those yellows and colors from the background and place some of them on his clothing. I like this because it makes me feel like the light is shining on the clothing and reflecting the colors of background. And again, I want a bright poppy background, so I'm adding a little bit more yellow as my last background layer. So next step, I'm going to use the black Crayola to get the darks on his clothes. And I'm pretty much going to take this time to wrap up any watercolor I have left. This is going to be the final layer of my watercolor, so I'm pretty much just touching up areas where you can see like the background bled through. So now this is my absolute favorite part. If you would like to take your painting up a notch, then you can use white acrylic paint and your detail brush to go in and work on the highlights. You can see I'm adding a little bit of frizzies for where his hair is, and also applying the white acrylic wherever I see highlights. These are only the really white spots though. I do think this adds some great depth and brings the painting a little bit more crisp in the end. And also, if your acrylic is feeling a little transparent, that's no problem. Just let it dry and apply another layer right on top of it until you like how white it is. Alright, so one of my last steps, which again you don't have to do, but if you want to bring it up just a little bit, I am using a fine point Sharpie to outline some areas. And I feel like this is really going to help add a little bit of definition to some of his features and add a little bit more crispness. Again, I found the Crayola actually bled a lot more than I'm used to, so I felt like the Sharpie really helped add that layer of detail. So last and final step on our little guy, I am now taking my hairdryer yet again and drying him one final time. But this time my focus is really on the tape. Heating up the tape will allow you to be able to pull it off of your painting gently without ripping the paper. And it also ensures that we get a nice, beautiful, clean, super white border around our drawing. And yeah, so this is him all finished. If you do this painting as well, then let me know how it went in the comments below. Also, make sure to give this video a big thumbs up so that others can enjoy it as well. And if you're new to my channel, definitely hit the subscribe button if you'd like to see more content like this in the future. Alright, thanks guys, and I'll see you next time!